If you thought I was going to miss the opportunity to make Riff Analysis 33 about maybe the most infamous riff from Catch 33, you have severely underestimated me. Really, I'm going to talk about this whole short song, which has 3 separate riffs. There's this famous one, 2 related bangers in the middle, then we get this famous one again on the way out. That guy Yogev, who makes much fancier videos than me about kind of similar stuff, has a nice way of visualizing this riff, so let's take that as a starting point. This is another great example of graphic notation making Meshuggah stuff easier to handle. You can see that this riff is made up of 4 types of attacks. There's this thing represented by the long vertical line lasting for 2/8 notes. This thing represented by the short vertical line lasting for 1/8 note. This ending represented by the circle lasting for 2/8 notes. And just twice in the whole riff, there's this walk-up figure represented by the horizontal lines. Here's all of that. This is one of a few truly patternless sections on this album. We got some taste in Paradoxical Spiral and its friends, and there will be a few more in Death is Death, but this is probably the flashiest example on the whole album. A lot of times on this channel, I look at a riff or a groove and I talk about what's hard about it. Here I'm going to do kind of the opposite. I think it's kind of obvious what's difficult about this riff. It's pretty self-similar and it's non-repeating, so it's very easy to get lost and you have to memorize how it goes. But my experience with it is that once you get it, it becomes very easy. It just like rolls off my fingers whenever I go to play it, and I feel like I've internalized this much more easily than like any other of Meshuggah's non-repeating grooves. So yeah, instead of talking about what makes it hard, I'm going to offer a few ideas about what may make it relatively easy, all things considered. One thing is that this riff has an 8th note level granularity. Granularity is a term I use for talking about what level of subdivision any cells of a riff start on. Because the cells in this riff last for 1 or 2 eighth notes, we never get a cell that starts on the or E of a beat. So it's never on the 16th note grid. It's always, all the starts of these cells are on the 8th note grid. That makes things easier than they are in some of Meshuggah's trickiest riffs. Of course, there are notes on the and the E of the beat, as in the 1E and so like the main cell is this dotted 8th to 16th note thing, for example. But the 16th note level offbeats are subsumed within those larger rhythmic cells, which are always on either the beat or 8th note offbeat. I also think that one of the things that makes this riff fit much more nicely in my brain than it seems like it should is that the rhythms are kind of speech-like. I haven't done this, but I think it would be relatively easy to fit words to this rhythm in a way that would feel natural to say. There are pauses, it's at about the speed of speech, there are no groups of like a lot of stresses in a row or anything else that would make it not feel speech-like. People have been obsessed with the links between music and language since the dawn of time, and maybe this is an example of music kind of hijacking the capacity we have for speech to help in learning this rhythm. At least that's my speculation. Bonus points to anyone who comes up with lyrics to this rhythm with the correct syllable accents in the comments. A couple more ideas about this riff, not so much because they panned out all that much, but just so you know I've considered them. First is the idea of mirrors. One of these little groups of cells is a palindrome of another one, and one of the cell arrangements is itself a palindrome. Mirrors are a big theme on the album, both compositionally, especially as I talked about in the second video in this series, and in the lyrics, and of course the song titles and stuff. It's not at all systematic here, but maybe that's kind of the thing with this album anyway. It's fleeting fragments of mirrors more than clear-cut overarching mirror symmetries. The other thing is this idea of domain transformation that I've been playing with as a way of talking about sections without patterns. The idea is that in sections like this, where we get a bunch of cells in an apparently random order, what will often happen is the possibilities will tend to expand. That kind of happens here. We start with one type of thing, so groups of 3 or 4 short and long cells followed by an ending cell. Then we get like another possibility is introduced, so that offbeat walk-up thing. Then we get an even longer, kind of unusually long string of cells. Then we get the first string of cells that starts with a shorter cell. If you're looking for this stuff, you can find ways that the possibilities keep expanding. So if we're learning what might happen as we go, the range of things keeps getting bigger. I wouldn't say this is really the best example of this, but maybe it's one more way of thinking about the shape that these random sections can take. So after that riff, we get maybe the most headbangable riff on the whole album. The guitar riff pattern is an ABAC additive metrical process, which is that thing where you get a beginning with one ending and then the same beginning with a longer ending. It's contained in an 8-measure block, which then gets repeated. This is actually also a subtly non-repeating riff, at least in terms of pitch, because the pattern gets broken on the last 2 beats of the 8-measure block. Part of what makes this pattern so headbangable is that it pulls back to a quarter note level granularity, half as fast as that of the first riff. Again, what I mean by that is that the individual components of the pattern always start on the beat. There are also a lot of nice anchor points where big attacks land on the beat, which makes it simpler to keep track of everything. It's much easier to play or headbang to something where the guitar and the cymbals are hitting at the same time, as opposed to something where they're offset from each other by an 8th note or a 16th note. Also, those staccato open string attacks and the little bits of space they create in the texture are so darn groovy, and just scanning in my brain, they aren't that common in Meshuggah's music. Then we get another riff that has the same kind of abstract shape. It's another ABAC additive metrical process, but this time they let it run for a full 16 measures before truncating it. After that riff, we get another time through that first chaotic riff of the song. One more quick note about harmony before the full playthrough. As I've kind of talked about throughout, and especially in the last video in this series, most of the music up until this point has been very second-y. That is, there are a ton of minor and major seconds and sevenths, aka interval classes 1 and 2, in all the guitar riffs. That changes in this song, which is instead very third-y. The first riff is pretty much all minor thirds, and that walk-up spans a major third. And then the main melodic thing in the second riff is a descending major sixth, then an ascending minor third, which when you take all those notes together with the open string, outlines a diminished 7th chord, so all minor thirds. And then the third riff has this very prominent descending major third. Why the change from seconds to thirds? Is this a little bit of a rosy glow of life before we return to death in the next track? Is it because this is a new chapter of the album and it has a new harmonic character? I'm not sure right now, but something to keep in mind as we keep going with this album. Oops, that will have to wait for the next video in this series. Since I opened the lyrical can of worms in my last video, I can't help pointing out a few more of my favorite paradoxes on the album here, where pretty much every line of the lyrics is a paradox, oxymoron, or stark juxtaposition. Structured chaos, innocent guilt, trampling crowds of solitude, a lifetime lasting a second, and this really trippy image of being the soil beneath oneself. But maybe the most interesting thing is what we get in the last 2 lines of the lyrics for this song, which is the image of the gods of randomness, which resonates obviously with the randomness of the first riff. But it also points to what might be one of the neatest paradoxes or ambiguities in the lyrics. The last line of the song, which is linked to this randomness, is this one about being alive and multicolored in a dead monochrome world. My question is this. Is being alive equated with randomness in the sense that it sets one apart from confining, dead, gray, predictable systems? Or is order and meaning what it is to be alive in that it sets one apart from the dead, chaotic entropy? Both interpretations are alive in the music. On the one hand, the 4/4 backbeat is super common and might seem like a dead kind of default meter compared to the vibrant irregularity of the guitar patterns. On the other hand, the 4/4 backbeat is what kind of gives the music life, what makes it groove, what makes it so infectious and headbangable, in opposition to the paralyzing randomness and angularity of the guitar riffs. Is one interpretation better, or are they just 2 sides of the same coin? Might one even say that, in a sense, in death is life? Thank you as always for watching. If you like this stuff, you know what sorts of things to do about it. See ya.